Hopefully you built a beautiful activity indicator with an own custom color. I'm going to show you how I solved it. So what I did was I imported the activity indicator and the colors from React Native Paper, and that allowed me to go inside my render function and say, well, I could do two things. I could return early and I could say here if is loading, and then I could return something else. I opted to render it inside of the safe area view that I already have here. And what I did was I put a conditional in here that said is loading and this would allow me to render something while this was loading. And what I rendered was, there was a couple of options. But what I decided on was, and I'll show you why I did this, is I decided to render a view. And this view that I rendered, let me just get the view from, I'll create a custom view. Well, I'll show you what I basically did. So if it is loading, I would render a view. And that view I would position absolutely. So an absolute positioning means on the screen of the phone, I'm going to position it where I want to position it. So it's absolute depending on this. So the entire screen, I can say, well, render it over here, or render it over here, or render it over here. So knowing that I can just determine where I want to render it, I gave it a position absolute, and I said, render it top 50% and render it left 50%. And then I gave it an activity indicator with a size of 50, and that activity indicator, I moved up 25, so half of it. So I deducted half the size of the activity indicator so that it would center itself in the middle of the screen. Because if I didn't do this, it wouldn't. So let me just quickly import view from React Native. Import view from React Native. And then we can go and we can adjust this. So if we import view from React Native, what we'll see here is that if we reload, we're going to see an activity indicator pop up for 2 seconds, right? And it's right in the middle. Let's do that again. It's right in the middle. But if I don't do the margin and deduct half of the size, what we're going to see happen is, it's off center. So a bit of math here to render it in the center. Doesn't really matter where exactly you rendered it as long as you're happy with the position. This is how I would render it in the center. But there are some optimizations we need to make. So we could say const activity indicator. We'll call it loading. We'll say const loading is equal to styled, and we'll give it activity indicator. And then we'll give it a custom style, and we'll say margin left minus 25 pixels. Minus 25 pixels. And that will give us a custom loading indicator. And then we can remove this, and we can still give it these properties, right? And then for our view, we'll say const loading. Well, it really depends on what you want to do. So what would we call this? We could call this loading container. That sounds good. Naming things is always hard, honestly. So we'll say loading container, and then we'll give it a position absolute. And we'll say top 50%. And then we'll say left 50%. And by doing that, now we can say loading container here. Loading container. And if we save this, now all of a sudden, we should have a loading container that loads every time we reload. Awesome. We can clean up our styles here. And now we have some interaction while the API call is happening to kind of indicate to the user, hey, I'm trying to retrieve something. Very important user experience. Very important. So now that we have that in here, we've basically tightened up our end-to-end between calling the API and actually retrieving the data.